Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us tonight. My name is Carlo Maiolini. I am the scientific communication expert of Muse. I welcome you to the event A World of Many Words, greeting you on behalf of the director Michele Lanzi. This is a very interesting conference because it is at the center of a masterclass called A Weekend in 2063. So since yesterday, we have been hosting 27 artists, graphics, architects, even a dancer. And they met here to try and imagine possible futures with the coexistence of humans and non-humans. We need this coexistence, and co-living is very evident to everybody. As a museum, we are trying to offer these multidisciplinary conferences to activate the community around us. In a world which seems to be losing hope, it is important to trigger ideas, education, staying together for consistent and shared visions is very important. Today, we read about the funding loss and damage, an initiative which was submitted by local communities and climate activists of the poorest areas of the planet. And finally, today, we saw the first hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of dollars of all governments. So we have the feeling that the activation, the involvement of everyone can really be important for the future of mankind, and this is the reason why we welcomed the invitation by Malivale of talking about the future. I would like to introduce the speakers of tonight, thanking for our two sponsorships, our two sponsors, Lavazza and Acqua Levico. I give the floor to the people in charge of the MasterCard, Malivale, Elisa Liberato, Lorenzo and Mara. Thank you.
Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. And of course, Fama and Lanzinger, who let us organize this masterclass, and Carlo Maiolini, who was the executive manager of the whole event. I do not want to spend too much time introducing the conference because Fiona will do that for us. The framework within which the conference was organized is a masterclass. Fiona today held a workshop for the participants we selected coming from all over Italy, and is going on tomorrow as well. This masterclass was saw the involvement of many different subjects, speculations on narration, the imagination of the future, and the possibility of coexistence between various species since 40 years. And of course, it is a very interesting proposal with many different perspectives. We have been following the project Like Life, within which the masterclass is being held. It is a project uniting different competencies and relationships, science, design, which is considered as the mirror of many other prospects, and this is the reason why we invited, and we're very glad to have Fiona Raby here. We also involve fiction, anthropology, archaeology, a lot of tools which we use to imagine. So before giving the floor to Fiona, I would like to introduce her, even if she is very well known. She is a professor of design and social inquiry at the New School of New York, co-director of the Designed Realities Lab, and together with Anthony Dunn, she is one of the theoretical of the speculative design. She is experimenting an innovative platform of research and teaching, looking at design as a catalyzing element for interdisciplinary imagination, like a lab of many worlds, to explore the idea of multiple possibilities in front of a vision of the world which is increasingly monolithical of a technological future. At the end of the Lectio magistralis, we invited Lorenzo Barbasetti with the Prometheus Food Life, who's going to introduce us a food speculative proposal of 3 different tastings, which will follow Fiona Raby's speech. Now, welcome Fiona Raby once more, and I give you the floor.
Hello. All right, that's working. Okay, I'm going to start. I am so delighted to be here. This is just incredible, and what an incredible kind of event this is. I've actually been blown away by invitation from Mali Vali, bye, Elisa, Mara, Lorenzo, with Carlo at the museum, bringing us all together in this masterclass. I think the ambition of what you're trying to do is really important. The work is really important, reaching these very diverse communities. Working on multiple fronts, from kind of new structures, initiating new structures, new policies, new ways of seeing the world, and not one world, but many worlds. And what draws these communities together is the task of changing mindsets and an urgent need to think differently. So I think that's what we're kind of here for. And I'm going to start with this quote because I love this quote. So the impossible attracts me, Ra said, because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change. So, maybe it's time we start with the impossible. Maybe that's the only route we have forward. So the impossible for Tony and I is a place of nourishment. It's actually a place of a training ground for uncertainty. So what's impossibility centers on the imagination. So the imagination plays a key role in that. And imagination is often viewed as a form of escape, an indulgence, a retreat from reality, and I think shockingly, even in education, that's kind of seen. And yet the ideal of reality itself has become problematic. Is reality actually working for us? If we kind of look around and see, what we've created. So perhaps being realistic is might not always help us. So I think that imagination has lots of kind of myths. One of them is that it's the easy bit at the beginning. But for those of us who are sort of working within the world of imagination, it's actually incredibly hard to do the more you dig down into it. In literature and cinema, art, of course, imagination is encouraged and it flourishes. But I think in design it's a little more tricky. Design is sort of expected to kind of connect to the real world and do real work. But I think this is where it's quite interesting, the tension between the two, the sort of the rubbing against real and fiction. I think this is where it can be really quite powerful, a powerful space, a powerful medium to work with. So if you're working in imagination, one of the things that you're going to find really easily is that you don't fit very well. The things that you do are sometimes, not sort of seen as slightly odd and don't work. And I think that's the point. They shouldn't fit. If they fit too much, then I think you haven't pushed at the imagination enough. So it can be pretty tricky to navigate, and that's why the skill of working with the imagination has to be crafted, and why it's not something that happens quickly, and it's not an easy thing to do. So a tiny bit of background. Actually, I've got to keep an eye on my time. Okay. So it's funny because straight out of school, when Tony and I started out as very idealistic, well, we're still idealistic actually, designers. We wanted our objects that surround us to express more of the kind of emotional world rather than necessarily efficiency, utility, and economy. designers are making lots of chairs and tables, and all these things already exist in the world. Do we keep adding to these things? Is that as our role as designers? And we saw the humans as being these very complex kind of, psychological beings, and we wanted to reflect that complexity a little bit more. So it was a playful project. And actually, funny looking back at it, I mean, we did this, actually it's cut off here, but it was done in 2000, actually before 1998 or something like that. So basically, it was called Weeds, Aliens and Other Stories, and it was about urban dwellers and their relationships to plants as companions, as food, as tools for psychological interaction. So it's obviously very, very human-centered, but this was a long time ago. So, for example, this object... Oh, I've got this thing here, look. I've got this object here, cucumber table. And at the time, a central coffee table in a kind of center of the living room was supposed to have lifestyle, big lifestyle books that you had in the middle of your living room, to aspire to this kind of other world that's kind of out of reach. And we thought, well, why aspire? Why not grow something in your living room instead, and participate with this living thing that's sort of, and it has a little drawer, and the drawer pushes out and it's full of soil, and there's this kind of like a glass cucumber straightener, and actually it's got markings on measurements, because of course as humans we love to measure things, so we can see it measuring and growing as it grows, and you gather with people around and you wait and you think this thing to grow, and then you cut it and you eat it as cucumber sandwiches. So this is very kind of complex relationship already between something that's growing, that's something you nurture, something you love, and then something you eat. So we kind of like that complexity. And then this one here is this long horn, and we always sort of making fun of British people, and British people like to talk to their plants. So we created this horn that could talk to plants a little bit further away, and rather than shouting at them or kind of traumatizing them, you could whisper really slowly and carefully and intimately with the plant. But obviously with any tool that you make, if you've got a neighbor that's got a lovely plant and you're jealous, you can whisper evil things to your neighbor's plant and torment it. So that this was another kind of message we were trying to say with our objects we were making. And perhaps this is our first interspecies kind of a playful example where there's a chair where you share the underneath is soil, and we grow the plants, and sometimes you own the chair, and other times the plants take over the chair, and if you want the chair, you're going to have to sit on the plants and destroy the plants. So already you've got these complex ideas in your living room, in your sort of home space. And of course, as young idealistic designers, we felt that we wanted to make them, and we approached companies to make them, but they were told that there was no market for these objects, that they weren't real. There was nowhere for objects like this to exist in the world. And so, was that the end of our journey? We'd just come out of college, we'd made this project. Was that finish? Or is this something? So we thought, okay, well, this doesn't fit into the real world. This was the beginning of our journey, and I think we're still on this journey, all these years later, 25 years or so later. So imagination, we're back to that again. So there's this myth again that the imagination is the self-expression, personal experience of the designer. And I would say that in some ways, if you're working with imagination, you have to actually work even harder than you regularly would, because in some ways, it's the ability of the designer is to kind of tap into a collective imagination, to sort of multiple other imaginations, and to train how to do this, and to inspire and leave space for other imaginations to participate in this bigger kind of imagination. So if it's too all predetermined and sewed up, well, you haven't kind of pushed haven't kind of connected at all. So that was. So one of the places that we realised that imagination could flourish was in the world of emerging technologies. And we did a lot of early work looking at challenging the smart world. And we set up a whole different way of thinking about it based on electromagnetic radiation. I'm not really going to talk about this project, but there are these gaps where imagination was allowed to pursue. And we ended up making another set of kind of objects that, again, not our imaginations. We wanted to put these objects into people's homes. We wanted people to live with these objects that looked at smartness in a very different way and get other people's thoughts about what these objects did. And they all had different kind of fears and hopes embedded in them. And they did different things. They actually were working prototypes. They worked. And all of that is kind of, we put it into a book that went out of print, but luckily Bloomsbury a couple of years ago bought it back. So this book is now back in press, which we're very excited about. But it's actually a very funny read, and it's very revealing about people's thoughts about technology at the time of this sort of smart revolution. A very different view into technology. So imagination again. So imagination is not very efficient. It's not necessarily going to solve problems directly. And I think it is about sort of thinking differently. And I think it's about invention, how to sort of, invent kind of things and put them in the world. So one of the key projects for us, and so it's an engine of inquiry, how to use imagination to sort of ask lots and lots of questions. So I think for us, this was a key project for us. It really was a key project because up until this point, we had made every single prototype work. There was no Arduino. We had, old-fashioned stamp chips that were huge, and we'd make it because if it didn't work, it wasn't real. It didn't exist in the world. And as a designer, then we had no currency in the world. So for us, we did this project terrified, right? Because how could we explore all the things that robotness, this was robots in the home, that robotness could be? How could we ask all the questions and make working prototypes that we had no money, no funding to do? Are we just going to sit quiet and not say anything, or do we participate in some way? So these are all made of wood that we made a film to try and bring them to life, to try and suggest that they were real, that they moved and they did things. And we really worried that we wouldn't be taken seriously. But this was a big lesson for us. It reinforced, we had lots and lots of feedback into this project. We had people wanting to work with our students in the labs. It was a huge kind of revelation to us that we could ask questions in this way and use props and things to tell very different stories and things that opened up sort of ideas. I'm not going to go into any details of those because I've got more things to do. But that led us to 10 years working with our students in the world of biotechnology. We were like non-scientists with not a clue about biotechnology. It was 2000, down here it should say 2005, it's cut off. But this was 10 years from 2005 to 2015. And we, at that time, the human genome was being unraveled, and there was all these things about what our biological future was going to be like. There was no bio labs or anything like that. And with our students, we collectively, all together, tried to think through different scenarios and different ideas about what this future with this technological, biological future might be like. And I think that courage came from the robot project that we did. And it was, it was a huge kind of... and the reason also was why should the future be thought out only through the expertise of the scientists who can do the technology? We thought, where is the sort of input from the creative, the creative people are going to ask very different questions. They're going to connect in very different ways. And this is what the success of this 10 years was at the Royal College. We really did work at sort of opening and asking questions in a ways that perhaps weren't being asked or questions. And some of them are quite off-the-wall kinds of ideas, but they always had underneath them some very serious questions to be asked. And we worked very closely with Imperial College at the end. We had a very strong relationship with a science university next door. And that really reinforced, again, this creative space that we kind of had to work with. And most of the best ideas that were here were not solutions to a problem. They were not applications. They were looking at, most of them posed dilemmas. They were all about sort of dilemmas and how to sort of, there was positives and negatives, and they were sort of put in a way that was very easily to be understood by a much broader audience to ask the questions or put those questions out into the world. Again, I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to move forward a bit more. But I want to talk a little bit about this project, the Forager project, because this is one of our projects that we did ourselves, where we entered into this space of dilemma and trade-off and kind of, what does it mean to work in a way creatively through using design? And it's funny because this was probably our most exhibited project. It just went crazy. It went around on various exhibitions non-stop for probably 6 or 7 years, and we didn't even see it. It kind of disappeared, and there were copies of it, and it disseminated in a way we had no idea that would happen. And basically, I still think it's quite funny because a lot of the curators who showed the piece still saw it as a provocative solution. An external microbial stomach. I'll explain a bit more about how we got there, to enable people to eat cellulose. So it was seen as a kind of a solution, but in fact it wasn't. It was always a kind of a set of questions that we sort of posed. And in some ways, for us, it was always about the energies of activists. The activists, the bottom-up energies of people, they were the ones that, for us, from the grassroots, are the ones who are going to make the innovations and start to sort of push at the edges. And this is what we actually designed, and I'll explain a little bit more, and the project is 14 years old, and so much of this sort of some of it's changed and some of it hasn't. So it's interesting to kind of revisit it and kind of have a little look at sort of the issues and the kind of complexities. So it started off a very interesting way. We weren't commissioned. Raby Nadur from Design in Darba was asked to do this enormous world conference, huge kind of event with all these big architectural firms with these massive visions of the future. And we were like 5 renegade groups of people. So already Raby was amazing because he was saying, well, actually, the South African team, they said, well, we don't want to have one coherent future world. We want to bring, 5 really different ideas and put them on the table of how, how we might think about the future of farming. For us, we were a little bit overwhelmed because the more research we did, we realized what incredible work people were doing in this field already. As designers, what on earth could we contribute to that? Because people were doing it already and they were doing it in fantastic ways. And, so we wanted to sort of push in a different way and ask some very different questions. So at the time, all these contradictions were appearing. So this was there were a great load of people doing stuff. And at the time, the Edible Todd Morton, West Yorkshire, 2 lovely ladies, Pam and May, were setting up this infrastructure where they wanted to plant human food everywhere because they wanted a sustainable village. They wanted to be self-sufficient. But of course, they were disregarding any kind of biodiversity. Anything that was left over, they wanted to plant human food and nothing else. So there was no sort of sense of it's beyond the human at that point. So we found that a bit disturbing. And then at the time, in 2009, the British, actually it was the Scottish Forestry Commission, were going to sell off the forests because they saw that this was one way of keeping the forests economically viable. So this business group made this report and suggested that they seed wild produce in the forest so that consumers can forage the wild food. So this was all a bit kind of, okay, so that's a bit strange. But there's, obviously foraging is sort of really important, the emotional connection, the well-being. So there's this, there's this really strong connection for being in the forest. But, business could see this as a translation into kind of capital. So this was, this was going on. But we were attracted by this. This was the statistic given, and it was seen that land was the issue. And in order, what we heard was to feed this many people and keep biodiversity, that the crop yields would have to 3 times the amount on the same land. So then the contradiction started to be, well, if you increase it by 50%, a lot of the fertilizers are really harmful to the planet. So if you're digging up these fertilizers and sticking it in the planet, that's going to be really problematic. And then sort of plant scientists were saying, well, actually, we've got a natural solution to this. If we genetically put wheat plants and pea plants together, the pea plants create nitrogen in their roots, and this is going to do a natural process of giving us nitrogen into the soil. It's an ecological, natural approach. So, and then at the same time, Drew Endy at Stanford was looking at synthetic biology. This was going to make, their pitch was saying that there are 250,000 plant species in the world, and only a tiny number are edible. If we can make more things more edible by genetically modifying it, then, this is going to be a better situation. So rather than planting other food, we're going to have to engineer the food. So, all of this is kind of going around in our heads thinking, oh my God, what are we going to design? So we started this project, so it wasn't about future farming, it was about a group of the future activists, and we thought that they were the ones who were going to actually do this work. And so, again, we were looking at, we were sort of thinking of English people, and an English DIY culture is unbelievably serious. People are really sort of working, almost not quite full-time, but dedicated to creating things and can make incredible things. So they had the ability, and then also with the synthetic bio as something where if they got their hands on, they could actually engineer themselves. So this were the people who are going to do all this stuff. And of course, they were very influenced by these kind of, mechanical things, garden shredders, composters, food pulpers, kitchen waste utilities. These were things that they were going to adapt. And if you see the aesthetic that we have here, mechanical shrub and tree shredders. So these were the inventors, and these were the kinds of objects, biological objects that they were making in order to work. So these objects, these people represent very different attitudes to how far we go with the engineering of ourselves. So for the... there we go. So the weekender, there's the microbial stomach, and there's the kind of event, and off they go and take the stomachs off with the machine, and slowly the stomach gets around the middle, and then you sort of suck up the cellulose, and eventually the stomach ends up around the waist, around the body, and those that are really, really, really dedicated were these ones here, and basically they didn't think this was enough, and they would take the cellulose directly into their stomach, and they had engineered already their stomach, so their stomach was now the place where they were sort of digesting the stomach. So this was our sort of range of kind of attitude and sort of what kinds of tools could kind of occur here. So there was 2 directions. The wild plants could be engineered to be edible, or the human digestive system can be engineered to absorb cellulose. So you could have been in those 2 directions. We didn't sort of suggest which one it would be. And flowers, what happens to flowers? Oh, what's that? Oh, I'm sorry. So I'll try and go a little bit slower. Sorry, thank you. I'm okay for time, so I'm not sure. I will calm down. So flowers. What do we do with flowers? Because maybe they, unless they're edible, maybe we can't have them in the world because, they're uneconomic, or, so maybe all the flowers also have to be edible. So we sort of thought about that. And so we got interested in digestion systems, particularly cows' digestion systems, how the cow digests. birds as well. They have gizzards, and the gizzards cut up, or take in really hard seeds, and the seeds they line the crop, and the enzymes come from the seeds, and enzymes are the things that actually help the digestion. So then we got obsessed with enzymes. So we were looking at there were diets about the enzyme diet. What's the least amount of food you can eat to just develop enzymes? And apparently the human pancreas is not particularly efficient. The human pancreas is twice as heavy as that of a cow, which is quite interesting. So we're finding all these facts out. So I hope let the translator catch up. So if we're going to change the human biology, we might have to be much more efficient absorbing all the nutrients. So we kind of went down that route in 24 minutes. Okay, so I could play a little bit of this video actually. I'm going to take the sound down because it's I'm taking the sound down. Yeah, take that, thank you. And I can talk over it. So this research project was the result of the research project. It was a video that was shown in a conference that tried to show the lives of these foragers and what they were doing. And we had a bit of a presentation, and we didn't think that it would go much further than that, I guess. But I guess because of the work we were doing at the Royal College of Art with our students, looking at biology, it just became more of a platform, a bigger platform, at which multiple activities kind of span off from it. So this was us just looking at the foragers. It's got cutting sounds. Can we have a bit of sound? What's that? So that was our contribution. And we tend to work with very tiny budgets with no money, like the robots. We made it on shoestring budget, but we obviously try and make the most. But throughout then the next few years, the more we showed the project to people, the more people were interested in the project, and we managed then to actually make some of the pieces, and we made quite a few of them. And then another thing was we worked with this Jason Evans, a fantastic photographer, who really, he would do the shoots, not us. And it was kind of a lot about his imagination. He would always have people in the background celebrating, having fun. He thought the future was Nike wearing sports gear, so everyone was in sports gear because he thought that there's always going to be sports gear in the future. So he was very playful and a huge joy to work with. We worked with him on these images. this was all his students, actually. We went with a truck from the Royal College of Art, put all the objects in the back, worked with their students on a shoot. It was all about the photography students learning how to shoot. So we've always worked with Jason. We could never afford photography, so he would do these shoots for fashion magazines. We'd lend him our pieces, and then we'd let him do what he liked, and then we'd get some photographs. So there was all this negotiation and bargaining and exchange of skills, and we were stimulated by him, and you know, it was a lovely relationship we had. So then we exhibited the pieces, but this for us was the message of this project. You know, do we change the world to suit us? Or do we change ourselves to suit the world? So there was no answer. It's like, here is all these options, all these things. You know, what are we gonna? You know, what are we gonna do? So that was that project. Huge numbers of people involved over the time, and you know, writing. You know, doing this work didn't fit anywhere. There was very few people writing about it. Tony and I are not particularly like writing. We're practitioners. So, you know, when we did speculative everything, it was quite scary to put this book together in terms of, you know, would it be of interest to people? Would they find it interesting? And we kind of gathered things together that we thought that people were doing, that, you know, were trying to do something that was, you know, in this space, trying to bring that all together and understand it. But I think when we wrote the book, chapter 7, The Aesthetics of Unreality, I think that was for us the key chapter in the book. We really had to, and I think it's what we're still working at. You know, we've written another book, and we're still trying to understand this idea of the unreality, the aesthetics in design. How do we use it? How do we use it well? How do we kind of engage people in it? So we're still on this quest. We're still unresolved. So imagination, more recent work. I have 30 minutes. I'm okay. We're okay for time. So a little bit more up to date with the projects. And so I think in some ways how we use imagination has shifted again. How we use it to help us think of different worlds, multiple worlds. So this is something that we're sort of trying to think about with the imagination. Being in the world differently. Not somewhere far away or different from us, but being in the world differently. How do we imagine that? I think the workshop that we tried to do today was sort of trying to say, how do we break the elastic of reality and work alongside in this space? How do we be differently in the world, think differently? And I think we probably need it more than ever to be thinking like this. So this was I'm not going to spend much time on this project, but, you know, globes as an object that sit in your home, I think are fantastic objects that you have. When you sit and you look at a globe, you can get absorbed completely about where things are in the world. And so we wanted to revisit the globe. And also for many reasons. It was part of the Bauhaus celebration of and it was taking place in a museum that is a house, a Bauhaus, Mies van der Rohe house. And we discovered in Germany there was these fantastic historical mathematical models for exploring geometries. They're made of plaster and string. They're commercially available by German manufacturers. So they were being manufactured, but they were not being manufactured for the general public. They were too expensive, but they were distributed to museums. They were distributed to libraries, to public spaces that people could understand these geometries. So we felt, well, okay, well, maybe that's a way in which objects can exist in the world outside of the kind of commercial way. So we wanted to explore globes in a different way. So we did a whole sort of research on, we looked into literature, the fringes of science, mathematics, thought experiments from astronomers, and objects from the edges of the universe. And we had a conspiracy theory. We've got the flat Earth there as well. That's included in this group. Tons of research that we always connect with the globes. And originally we thought of them in separate sort of worlds, but we realized that they needed to all exist in the same space. They needed to jostle with each other, sit next to each other, be in the same reality as each other, take equal space up on the table. They're all real and they all exist. They're all in the world. So that was important for us, and that's, I guess, the most important thing I think about this project. So I won't go into any of the detail of all the different things. The other thing that I think is, because there's some lovely stories behind some of these, but the other thing I think was important, we saw them as sort of models of a starting point, that they would, let me see. So we saw them as sort of a place, a starting point where we could, on the walls, they would be just kind of white forms that then we could put sort of different imaginations on the walls, and the walls would be filled of kind of mappings, different mappings, and this group of globes would grow, and the mappings would grow, and it would be, so this would be the start of a project. We're always starting a project. We never sort of get any further, any forward. But what was nice about this project was that curators at MUDAC, actually it's all cut off at the bottom, but they kind of picked up on this idea and used the globes as a way to retrace historically in their Spaces the Place exhibition. They looked back at how the belief system, how our belief systems evolved and how we understood the world historically, and they put all these kind of maps and diagrams and historical ideas around the globe. So we thought that this was a great kind of, move forward in relation to the project that we'd started. It's kind of been moved on to someone else to then add another thing, and we were part of their research. So that was very exciting that we could kind of connect with them in that way. So this is the last project I can show. I'd probably 10 minutes, then we can have some questions. So this is our most recent project. And again, it's about trying to think outside what we already know. How do we make this shift? And this is still, as I say, work in process. And how do we think outside and still resonate with others so that we can still bring people along with us? This is still a challenge, this project that we've done. We're still sort of struggling a little bit. But I think that, post-pandemic, I think there's huge shifts in thinking. So many things have to be rethought, reimagined. The ecology, the climate crisis, decentering the human. I think this is why it's such an important gathering here. And that we see so many people trying to connect and think within this space. But I think decentering the human, it's an impossible space. It's always going to be human-centric. Everything we think, we try, it's always. But I think, we have to work out how we shift from our human centricity, because it's always going to be there, but we have to make much, much bigger effort. So when we moved to America, we went to live in New York. This is not what we were expecting to be engaged in. Enormous continent with places, extremely large areas where, where humans hardly ever enter. They feel like separate worlds, different logics kind of prevail. They're not centered on human needs at all. They're places for non-humans. So if you spend any time in these places, it takes a huge amount of preparation, organization, planning. So it's a struggle to exist outside of these human worlds we've created. These abundant infrastructures, we take them so much for granted, they're invisible. And when you're in these spaces, you really quickly realize that you're little more than biomass. That if anything happens to you, you'll end up as food, calories, home for different life forms. You begin to see yourself just as stuff, as kind of part of this, a planetary kind of environment. So it's very humbling, spending time in under a tent fabric in cold places on this planetary Earth and this spinning rock. I think everyone should have this experience. The other thing that happened is we've lived in cities our entire life, and suddenly we find ourselves in a woodland. It's had a huge impact on our everyday life. We're not too remote. We have neighbours, we have electricity, but it's not outside our house. It's not our world. It's not a human space. We literally step outside into a world of creatures, of fungi, of bears, of eagles. So many species. It's bewildering and humbling to live there, and we experience into the species boundaries on a daily basis. I talk to them, there are limits to, coming into the house. And it's funny because Thomas Saraceno says that, we should let the spiders flourish. We do let our spiders flourish, but in the morning, when you're going to the bathroom and one of these enormous things appears next to you, it's like, and actually the grasshoppers are amazing. For 2 weeks of the year, I don't know how they get into the house. They literally come in, and I spend my time with a glass and a piece of paper transporting them almost at some point almost hourly outside of the building because trying to get them out. And we have to live under a mosquito net, not for mosquitoes, because you have no idea what's going to land on us in the night. So we're living. I have no romantic notions at all. We live with death and decay on a kind of daily basis. And the other thing that had a huge, profound effect was teaching with Dominic Petman. And we run this course collectively. He's a post-humanities academic, and we have been with the students, catching up with the reading, trying to understand this space. And it made a huge impact on working with him, and we're hoping to work. Of course, we're going to join together more and try and do more work together, connect with communities who are trying to do this collectively, and try and help, in this group of people to try and think through these issues with him. So one that I just want to add was a fantastic project that was done by one of our students in the Design Realities class of Species in Dialogue. She spent a torturous semester trying to see the world from a non-human perspective. She took this screenwriting class. The screenwriting was excellent because in screenwriting you only have the characters and what they say. And of course, if it's humans, then, there's no, so she basically got rid of all the humans and tried to describe, mosquitoes, dewdrops, leaves, pollen, mice, squirrel, fleas. She had bacteria and carbon dioxide, and tried to tell a story through all these non-human things. But to end every single week, she'd end up, and it was a very human story, and she would be devastated. Oh, it's too human-centric. And so we kind of realised that, but she made fantastic attempt, and it really, it's actually really delightful to. She tried to perform it as well and see, well, would reading it be better than performing it? It's actually seeing it in your imagination better than actually having someone perform it. So that was quite interesting, was it? So we learnt a great deal from just this experience of trying to put yourself into a world of, a non-human being. And this was, again, this is the thing, Jakob von Axhill, from a biologist in the 1930s. I think this is the key thing for us. We're easily deluded into assuming that relationship between a foreign subject and the objects in this world exist on the same spatial and temporal plane as our own relations with the objects in our human world. This is a fallacy, is led by a belief in the existence of a single world into which all living creatures are pigeonholed. this gives rise to the wide conviction that there is only one space and one time for all living beings. So that was like quite mind-blowing for us, that actually we're all living in these multiple sensory worlds of Umwelt that he described. So we wanted to explore this more, and we wanted to understand, we wanted to sort of re-look at the human from a Western technological perspective. Humanness is very mechanistic, defined by measurement, whereas in some non-Western representations, it's much more layered, more sensual, in tune with with multiple worlds, more sort of inspirational view of the human. There's the human frequencies is quite a small bit, but you know, there's the frequencies that animals and things live at are very, very different. So we started just playing with the human form and trying to look at the way in which a sort of human Umwelt might look like. It looked all much too much like Anthony Gormley. Anthony Gormley's done every human figure there is. But we moved into three-dimensional models. We were also looking at Shirin photography, which actually showed the sort of sensual thing, but we thought this was too scientific. We wanted to move into more emotional space, and more push harder on intuition. So we sort of played around with these. You know, if you stop, then maybe the sensual envelope kind of sort of expands. If you're moving through the space, it sort of moves through. We read that bears can smell up to 20 miles away. So is a particle of the human going into a bear's nose in 20 miles? So, you know, how far do we extend as a sort of atom? So it's a different way of thinking about Umwelts. So we sort of looked at multiple Umwelts. I'm running out of time, so I want to draw. So this was all too abstract, and it was difficult to communicate to people. So we wanted to create something that really, we wanted us to create something that happened in the everyday. And we sort of looked at different festivals, a part of human experience. We researched a lot, but also at the time there was lots of protests. People were out with banners and things on sticks, and we thought, well, could there be a way in which could there be a celebratory procession, something that was celebratory of this sense of these multiple worlds existing collectively together, these invisible parts. So we tried to look at very ordinary items like teapots and things in the everyday, as objects that we put everything on sticks so that they were part of a procession, part of a festival. We read that the vibrations given off from boats are more real to an ocean creature, the vibrations, than a solid rock. So it might as well be a solid rock. So, you know, this boat has an enormous solid rock as part of the boat. These invisible things become very tangible. I'm going to jump forward because I'm a bit... So we were just playing with these ideas of these sensual spaces. So this idea that, you know, we see modernist air as empty. You know, it's supposed to, but of course it's full, it's teeming with materials and microscopic life. And in a many worlds, this teapot might be less present than the air around it. So this teapot is actually hollow, and the bubble around it is the object, not the teapot. So it was like how to transfer this sense of this sensory world, make that the solid thing, the real thing in the world. So that's what we were playing with. And instinctively we thought these volumes, these plumes should be delicate and floaty, but we thought, no, they should be hard and solid. And those, you know, it's again the human perspective. So so we were playing around with lots of this. We made sticks and we started to mock them up. We played with AR, and we talked with the design ecologies at Kunstfact. It was a fantastic dialogue we had with them over a period of a month, which was really helpful. And we was exchanging when we were trying to think through lots of these ideas. We did experiments. I'm not going to show that. And then I think we explored different materialities. So I think this is where it changed. Does everything have to be on a stick? Maybe some things become, some things are transient and past of a festival. Other things that they can decompose. Other things could be mementos that are in the home, that are passed on from generation to generation outside the festival. They live in the home and they remind us of this kind of world that we need to sort of connect to. So this was idea of putting them in the world, in our homes. So this was a turning point for us, where not coming from snow country, snowshoes embody etiquette. You probably all know this if you're living in the up here in the mountains. When they're essential for those that follow behind you. If you don't leave the potholes that you can twist your ankles in, so they have a kind of etiquette. They're hard to use, but they help those behind you. So this idea of treading lightly, leaving no trace in the human world. So we created these kind of felt snowshoes, because we wanted for us to, how can we perceive ourselves, our humanness? How are we going to change the way we're looking at how we... So we thought that these objects could be subdued, a quiet celebratory. We made everything in felt, and suddenly we wanted it not to be celebratory and noisy and loud. Could you have a quiet festival? Could it be, quietness? Could we make a procession that's quiet and gentle and slow? And so that took a whole different kind of turn with the things that we were trying to create. So we wrote a little manifesto. And this piece is, normally you have like a rucksack or a backpack. And here we had the idea that on your back, you'd essentially carry your equivalent in biomass on your back as part of the festival. That's your biomass. You carry it. It's a teeming soil of mycelium, rocks, minerals, planetary debris, fragments of the universe, and the festival goers, carry this through the festival. So these are the objects that we are making at the moment. We went through quite a long process of making. I'm almost finished. This is the last slide coming up. So the idea of these are my last statements. So the idea of these festival objects is to continue to make them as props, to continue to evolve the thinking. This project hasn't finished. In some ways, it's just at the beginning. And we wanted to shift from rational thought to emotional, empathetic, embodied thought, and to be part of the procession, kind of that reconsiders our attitudes to human habitation and be more conscious of it. So we set out to... We made one set to sort of set out the idea, but we're trying to make a second set that are grown as mycelia, that participate in the festival, might take 4 or 5 months to grow a piece of their festival. So we've got 3D printed cornstarch and wood, and the mycelium will digest the figures. I quite like the idea that this mycelium is digesting the human, and something satisfying about that. So we hope that this project can contribute to the many voices that are in this space, the many voices, the different projects that are going on with you to attempt to change our mindsets, and the challenges that we're going to be facing. So thank you, and I think I went over my time, but thank you very much.
Grazie mille Fiona.
Thank you, Fiona, for your speech.
Grazie per...
Thank you for your long journey, which lasted 25 years among projects and ideas, which clarified, I think, how design can produce material objects, but also critical thinking, effective questions, in shifting our certainties, in threatening, in challenging our certainties, and trying to modify the categories through which we are used to think, and how design can play a political role. And finally, how it can refer, make real a lot of worlds. For me, it was a very interesting lessons. I knew some things, but some were new to me. I have a few questions, but I would also like to give some time to the public so that I can leave the space and time to our public. I would like to ask you, in the extreme imagination and speculative thought of your work, there still are objects. So there's a continuous, renewed trust in the objects. So I'm looking at projects, but also at objects which need to be material and materialized. So you still put your trust in this medium, which is between us and the imagination. A second idea, if we look at the objects, some objects at the beginning are somehow threatening, fearful. We look at these huge stomachs, which make me shiver, for example, make me worry somehow. So I would like to ask you, what is this fear which brings which the object brings? Is it something you wanted or something which simply happened?
Because thank you for your question. Actually, wow, because there's a lot to think about. So I'm listening to myself. The Forager project is particularly interesting because I think it was supposed to be slightly uncomfortable and difficult and challenging, because it was set within a context of synthetic biology, which was this emerging technology that, 10 years later, I'm not sure where it is there, but it was going to follow the digital revolution. It was going to be open source biology. We're all going to be able to download and do it. So there were all these promises that what it was going to be. And in some ways, we felt that, I guess like a lot of our work, that there's this technological vision and it's this long, straight highway and very few kind of critical thought about it. So I think we deliberately kind of wanted to be slightly upsetting. I actually think that the last project that we're doing, I find that quite gross as well. I think, mycelium eater. There's an image actually I didn't show. Maybe I show now actually. Oh, if there's one more image, which can you show it? I put it at the end. Which is kind of gross. It's almost like the human is becoming, what are we? It's like, there's a romantic sense of us with a sensuality, but then you start to, our mycelium figures with being eaten by mycelium, digested by mycelium. We're starting to move into sort of this grotesque kind of language as well. So, I don't know. I think obviously we're trained in 3D. We're trained to think through materials, that's our training. So we're always going to think through objects. That's our way of being in the world. And so we really we hope we can kind of contribute, because people are doing amazing stuff with all different kind of media, but this is our expertise. So, but I think we want sometimes these things to be unsettling and to challenge, in the way that art can do extremely well, but sometimes in design, we are held back a little bit. So, being provocative with a design is a little bit different, I think. I hope that answers your question a little.
Sì, grazie.
Is there anybody who wants to ask a question? Yes. Remember the microphone.
Grazie mille.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you, in this very long project, how important was history? In other words, I think that in order to imagine future, we need to use history in a creative way, to go and recover and recollect some elements and things which didn't seem interesting or have not been noted and noticed, or on the contrary have been very important and very destructive. So what is, in your opinion, the role of history in the design of future?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think incredibly important, and you know, we I think we've become more interested in history since now joining the new school, and being with our partner Dominic Petman. We're introduced to a whole. You know, we've always been, you know, futures. It's always been looking in the forward. We've never really, or we've kind of looked a little bit. We have actually looked back at various things. That's not quite true. But I actually think now we're being drawn attention to more historical things. And this is why I think that somehow the transdisciplinarity of groups that come together, we're seeing this within our student body now. So with our classrooms, we have both designers, we have from the liberal arts, we have, say, politics students and media, liberal, and historians. We have a fantastic, actually, historian in our class at the moment looking at quantum. And it's just fantastic that we can have this space to bring more theoretical people in the table around with the designers and somehow have an exchange. But it's really, really hard to work in this space collectively, partly because if you're looking historically, the traditions of how you publish and how you within an academic framework, they're very, very different from those within a design framework. So finding, again, these spaces where all of these different ideas can come together and feed off each other. That's why they're so sort of critical. But yes, I think even more so. And the more sort of broader that we can have, the more connected we can have and look back, I think the better. No question about that. Thank you.
Qual è il suo rapporto con la generative?
What is your relationship with the? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the word. Could you please repeat the question? What is your relationship with the creative generative AI with the construction of services and objects? What is your relationship with it?
That's completely outside of my expertise. I'd love to know what I think, to be honest, the other thing is Tony and I have deliberately stayed away from AI or anything to do with AI. I think also because so many people are looking at it at the moment. So it's a little bit like earlier on when the smart world was happening, we kind of went off and looked at electromagnetic radiation because we needed something, a different way in to the argument so that we could come looking at it slightly differently. And I think with AI, everyone is looking at it, everyone's thinking about it. And as a result, it's quite, I don't know, we firstly feel like, we're just going with this massive wave and just seeing what happens. And we don't have the expertise really to kind of to connect. But in our way of dealing with it is we started to look at quantum science and try to understand quantum ideas. That sort of we're still trying to understand it. We put forward a hypothesis to our students. If we didn't have we're living in a Newtonian way of thinking, but if our world was a quantum world and that everything was, we really took on board the ideas of quantum, how might the everyday be different? And we just wanted to have a very different way of looking at what's real time and shifting. And it's not looking at generative AI and what's going on there, but trying to broaden the discussion about the I guess, uncertainty and the sort of these ideas so there are other kinds of ideas coming into that space. It's not just everything looking at in this one kind of way. I'm really not sure, to be honest, how we broaden that discussion. It's a difficult one to, because it's like a super highway. So yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious to know what you think. I'm sorry, that's not a good answer, but.
Hello, ciao.
I would like to ask you a question connected with what Mara asked about the object. In all your projects, you're trying to get to the physical object. However, I feel you miss the production part or the dissemination part, the idea of disseminating this object in the world. So I think this imagination of future worlds, the try to imagine this future is not corresponding to the idea of producing objects in the presence. I'm thinking, for example, of the night table with the cucumber on it. Why are you missing these parts in order to sustain, also economically speaking, this type of researches? I have no idea how you fund them.
We work on very, very tiny budgets, and we tried to connect with the commercial world very early on, 20 odd years ago, and we were told that this work is unrealistic and it doesn't connect. So, the choice was then, do we make our work fit and sort of, or do we try and explore this language? Is it valuable or not? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not valuable, So I think that that's been our dilemma. It's like it's not from lack of wanting to connect with a way of shaping the world. So I think we've always been interested. For example, the globe idea is that a manufacturer makes not for the general public, it makes for institutions. So could these objects that are made circulate as, into libraries, that when you go to a book to read an idea, could you see an object and think about its relationship? Actually, some of our favourite places are the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, which is an anthropological collection of kind of stuff that people have made throughout, all over the world, and to make sense of the world. There are things that are symbolic or things that are practical, and they tell stories of different values, and they're real objects in the world. So could we use these objects to tell of different ways that we could be in the world? So, we're trying to think of, we've always taught as well, so we can't do this work independently. No one is going to fund it. It's like you see all of this work, it's done tiny budgets. The robots was like £5,000 to make that project. We were in the workshop at night spraying ourselves with paint. So we make objects with very small budgets. I mean, this last project is a bit different, partly because it's actually the project that we're making here in the NGV is done by out of commercial. If we were to make these objects commercially, we could not afford to make them. So we've been working in an academic environment. So in some ways, you could see our work. Rather than writing a paper, we could stay in academia and write papers and distribute our work as papers and books. But we have the, knowledge of making things, and how do we publish our work? Where does, there isn't any publishing house for an object, that's made with very tiny budgets that we make in the studios ourselves, or with small donations. So, it doesn't fit in the world, this work. It doesn't, there's no economy for it. It works within an academic framework, and it's supported by institutions and museums and places that are trying to generate thought and understanding, and that's where this work exists. It can't exist in any other way. It has no other way of surviving in the world. So, yeah.
For the very inspiring. My Italian is kind of as broken as my English, so let's just go with English. So it's kind of a follow-up question. So I understand that it stays in an academic framework, but still you do this effort. I mean, at some point in the presentation, you say that something was too abstract to communicate to people, and therefore you try to do something else. So my question, and maybe let me also add something, I think also imagining, it can be sometimes a bit of a privilege. Not everyone has even the time to imagine. So my question is whether you could elaborate a bit more what are the problems that you find in trying to communicate to people, and how you try to address those challenges.
So in some ways, we are working in an academic environment. We're working with expertise. The work is not generally for a broad. I mean, that's nonsense. It is actually for a broad audience. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are academics. We are teaching. We've taught all of our lives, and that's the framework we're in. So we're generating knowledge through an academic channel. And so we're confronted with lots of ideas on all kinds of levels. And I would say mostly our work is not aimed at a general public. It is circulating within an academic framework, and it is about an educational process of expanding our we work with trying to expand imaginations at a level within education, because even within education, there's very little room to imagine. So it is true, there is no room to imagine in the world. There are very few spaces to imagine in the world. It's a great privilege to imagine in the world, and we take it very seriously, that privilege that we have. And so we choose to work on things that try to try to tell stories that need to be told. We try to use objects as a way to engage someone in those narratives and stories. So yes, I agree, and I'm not really sure how to respond, because I think it is problematic in terms of how imagination has been so, the opportunities to imagine are so few. So, but I don't think it should be like that. I think that, like masterclasses in institutions, and I think this is quite an interesting challenge for institutions and academic places, that, how to bring these ideas out into, but I don't think everything's for a general public. So maybe that's a disagreement we might have. I think that if, there's a kind of expertise that, you can exercise, that you're trying to learn. And I guess it's, you learn and you push your expertise as far as you can, and then you try and use that expertise whatever level you can. So you're always trying to push your area of knowledge as far as you can. So, yeah. I'm not doing very well with these questions. Not very convincing, I'm sorry about that.
Grazie. Io avrei una domanda.
And I hope my question is going to be simple. I try my best. In the projects like foraging, I wonder, are objects used to develop the project itself, or are they the result of the project? So it is just something making comprehension better. So are objects more important for the project, or to make the final project more understandable?
I'm not sure. That's a great question. I'm unsure. It's actually quite interesting, because when we did, this is a slight difference, but when we first did our first project, Weeds, Aliens and Other Stories, the very first one, it was a book. It was and we had it in a book for 3 years as a sketchbook, and it was never, and people said to us, why would you make, why not, why just keep it as a book? Why make it? Why should it exist in the world? What does it do to become physical? Does it actually give us anything else? So, that project could have stayed as a series of sketches. All of the work could stay as sketches. All of the work could stay as, especially now with AR, with VR, do we need them to be physical things in the world? Do they exist? Is it enough that they're not? But I think for us as object, I think there's something very powerful about being in a physical space, and even when you see something it's this thing about reality again. It's real, it exists. When you see the robots and they're real and they're not, they're there, and you have to think, why is that a robot? And ask about it. It plays in a very different way on your psychology, to know that it exists in the world. So I think moving from the virtual to the physical, I think, is an important shift, because they take up space. And I think maybe what the Globe project is about, all of those ideas exist in the world, but by putting them on a table, making them real, they become physical, they become real, they suddenly occupy space, and they jostle with each other for, reality. They exist in the world. And I think that there's something about that that's very powerful. So I think that making the objects, however sweat and toil that it takes, it is worth making them.
Thank you very much, Fiona, really. I switch to Italian. Grazie davvero, Fiona, per questo
Thank you, Fiona, for your storytelling, on the role of irreality, of the absurd, of imagination, because it reminds us, and it is very important in a masterclass about imagining a future world. So it reminds us that the future is maybe not the most important thing to imagine, or better, the future is one among the many futures we can imagine, and what we imagine is maybe not the most interesting. Maybe I didn't use the correct words, but this is the idea I wanted to transmit. Over the last few days, we spoke about the fact that the futures can be different, and that the future that is the most interesting is probably not the one which is immediately ahead of us, in front of us. So imagination plays a key role, even at smaller scale, and the object is very important, even if it is not at production level. And this is even more important if we say this within a museum. So I would like to make another exercise of imagining a future through 3 approaches, and I will give the floor to Lorenzo. I don't know if you want to do that in the other room. Lorenzo is going to tell you the idea and the implementation of this work. It is very interesting. We will do that within a cultural, natural imagination continuum, surrounded by bodies and animals in the museum. Just a few words on Prometheus Food Lab. Is a cultural device funded by the chef and researcher Lorenzo Barbasetti of Prun, exploring the edible potential of remote places to recover the ecological role of humans in the landscapes through food. He's going to talk to us about Bites 2063, which is a site-specific speech about food and how we're going to eat in the future.
Grazie Mara e Lorenzo per avermi invitato, e grazie al museo, al Muse, grazie a Carlo che è stato preziosa guida nel gestire il tutto. E per me prima di tutto grazie anche perché è un grandissimo onore condividere questo palco con Fiona, che ha seriamente segnato la mia pratica di design, di designer mancato, perché a un certo punto ho studiato design e mi sono scontrato ripetutamente con una cultura estremamente legata al materiale e in grado di vedere esclusivamente al mondo attuale, quello della sfittica attualità del momento, mentre diciamo, specialmente Speculative Everything mi ha dato la capacità di comprendere qual è veramente il ruolo del designer, o almeno quello che volevo fosse il mio ruolo come designer, ovvero appunto la capacità invece di costruirli i mondi, non di costruire per un mondo che già c'era, perché a quel punto più o meno c'era già tutto. Però uscito dall'università sono riuscito a mettere insieme i 2 monconi della mia formazione, quindi la formazione gastronomica da una parte e la frustrata formazione di design, e quindi mi rimanevano questi mondi da esplorare, poi da accanito e vorace consumatore di fantascienza avevo un'idea fondamentale che se, un esempio banale, ma se nello spazio ci siamo arrivati è stato anche perché prima ancora della tecnica la cultura aveva preparato in qualche misura l'umanità a compiere quel passo. Quindi il ruolo dell'immaginazione, che non è un'attività infantile o sconsiderata, spensierata, ma invece è un metodo o un'attività che richiede un metodo, delle tecniche, degli strumenti assolutamente precisi e che chi la pratica continua ad affinare. E quindi mi sono trovato ad esplorare gli ambienti, esplorare il mio pianeta come fossero altri, come dico sempre, e quindi la mia chiave di lettura era quella del cibo, ma facendo il parallelismo, il cibo è esattamente quello che è l'oggetto per il design o per il designer, quindi ciò che è già pronto lì, che può essere, diciamo, può subire delle trasformazioni minime, ma che è già predisposto ad una dinamica commerciale, industriale, rigidamente vincolato comunque ad un'attività culturale e tradizionale. E mi sono reso conto che però al di fuori di questo c'era in realtà l'edibile, che infatti io mi occupo non dico mai di cibo, mi occupo di edibile, che è, appunto, come è stato tradotto, è tutto ciò che è potenzialmente commestibile, che però non è necessariamente percepito come cibo. Ogni cultura, ogni tempo traduce quello che ha intorno più o meno vicino, quello che ha attorno o quello con cui entra in contatto, lo traduce in un recinto di ciò che riesce o che intende utilizzare. Però questa è una piccolissima selezione di un patrimonio di significati enorme che esiste in qualunque ambiente. Appunto, remoto quindi non è tanto la voce sul vocabolario, direbbe ciò che è inaccessibile o molto molto lontano nel tempo e nello spazio. Questo è interessante perché io mi sono sempre occupato di spazio, di ambienti remoti, o appunto quegli ambienti che però nella mia pratica si traducono in attività, cioè in spazi rispetto ai quali, per quanto siano magari facilmente accessibili fisicamente, mancano gli strumenti per comprenderli, per capire quali sono i meccanismi che li regolano. Appunto, di solito mi occupo di spazi, in questo caso mi hanno chiamato a occuparmi di tempo, che poi i fisici magari ci dicono che sono la stessa cosa in realtà. Il 2063 è un tempo in realtà abbastanza vicino, eppure ne parlavo anche con Mara e Lorenzo, è fuori da quel confine che si pongono anche molte programmazioni nazionali, internazionali, che si fermano invece quasi tutte al 2050. E questo è, secondo me, parlando di immaginazione, molto importante, molto interessante, perché ci fa capire che in qualche modo la politica in certi modi anche certa scienza cerca di prevedere quello che è più o meno già prevedibile. Quello che però interessa a me, ma a quanto pare interessa tutti voi che siete qua, è cosa possiamo immaginare per dopo. E per immaginare intendo cosa vogliamo costruire anche per dopo. E per quanto riguarda la prospettiva del cibo o dell'edibile, quindi di tutti quei elementi minimi di un possibile linguaggio che possono costruire non tanto la narrazione, ma appunto la teoria del linguaggio ci dice che il linguaggio non è tanto solo un modo di esprimere, ma è lo strumento con cui costruiamo l'ambiente, il mondo che raccontiamo. Quindi il 2063 è molto vicino. Mi viene da pensare che potremmo, anche nelle dinamiche del cibo, ci saranno dei cambi probabilmente radicali se proviamo io ho cercato di ridurre un pochino gli elementi, diciamo, i fattori di cambiamento in ecologico, climatico, demografico e poi gastronomico. Quindi dal punto di vista demografico e climatico ci hanno preparato, o ci stanno preparando al fatto che ci saranno degli sconvolgimenti forse anche abbastanza radicali nei prossimi 40 anni. Dal punto di vista di come risponderà la nostra cultura a questo, ecco, per come leggo io la cultura in questo momento, credo che sia un pochino più lenta dei fenomeni invece, diciamo, climatici, ambientali, degli stress ambientali. Cioè, qui cerco di chiudere quello che secondo me è urgente cominciare a pensare, è che la cultura è uno straordinario meccanismo di sopravvivenza e di adattamento della nostra specie attraverso la cultura e anche attraverso gli strumenti che ha generato, anche emulando o imbrigliando in qualche maniera anche le strategie di adattamento di specie diverse, più rapide di noi, ha dato modo di adattarsi ad ambienti e a cambiamenti anche molto, molto radicali. Quindi diciamo che quello che abbiamo di svantaggio biologico abbiamo sempre cercato di compensarlo con la lettura, la comprensione dell'ambiente, e da lì siamo riusciti a estrapolare i meccanismi, a farli nostri, ad amplificarli. Quindi ecco, questa è l'idea, che la cultura riprenda un pochino il passo e torni a fare anche questo. Questo è quello che appunto è l'aspetto di quella coscienza e responsabilità ecologica che il mio lavoro vuole sviluppare e riattivare in questi ambienti, in questi spazi e in questi tempi a questo punto. E quindi quello che assaggerete non sarà nulla di estremo questa volta. In altri contesti l'ho fatto, ma saranno dei piccoli sfasamenti rispetto ad una cultura tradizionale che io critico sempre molto e che cerco di picconare, perché c'è bisogno di liberare gli elementi e gli elementi minimi e rimetterli in grado di conversare fra di loro, quindi troverete degli ingredienti assolutamente legati a anche una memoria, a una tradizione anche locale, dolomitica, montana, e degli altri che non c'entrano assolutamente niente, che sembrano molto lontani ma potrebbero essere molto vicini nel tempo. E questo ho cercato di farlo appunto sia con il cibo che con, poi insomma io lo intendo tutto insieme, quindi quello che si mangia e con quello che si beve. E l'idea, quello che vorrei, che è una sfida che lancio sempre soprattutto quando mi trovo in queste dinamiche, in questi ambienti di ricerca, di musei, è che il cibo deve smettere di essere un intrattenimento alla fine dei palinsesti, e quindi in questo siamo molto d'accordo, e Malival mi dà sempre anche l'occasione di tirare un po' la corda su questo, ma deve smettere anche di cercare di non essere una didascalia della ricerca che si fa. È un elemento, un ambito che ha il suo da dire ed è in relazione a tutti gli altri. E quindi adesso vi invito ad andare a mangiare, ma tornerete a casa con la fame, perché la fame alla fine è la cosa più importante. La spinta che chiama a leggere il contesto in una maniera completamente diversa e immaginare anche l'impossibile.
Grazie.